Hi guys, this is Sebastian back again. Thrifter, reseller, collector as well. And I'm going to go over some of my recent sales within a couple different areas. And I'll start off with clothing. And there's quite a few pieces to go over. And then I'll do books. And then lastly, art. And some of the best ones are going to be on the back end. But they'll be peppered throughout in general. But first, before I get started on some of the sales, I'm just going to show a couple of personal pickups. And I've recently been trying to learn a bit more about this area, which is vintage Polish poster art. And I can't show the whole thing because there is a little bit of nudity, and I figure, some people might not want to see that. But vintage Polish poster art's very interesting because I think given the country's history, they had very interesting design styles that emerged, with they were under Soviet rule for a while. But for some reason, for the poster art, the controls on them was not quite as tight, so they were able to get away with some interesting design work. And then there was also the fact that versus the American movie posters, like for a lot of the movies, the Americans and a lot of Western Europe would do more like realistic design, especially the Americans, because it was really to sell the movie. So they weren't taking any big artistic risks. Whereas in Poland, I think the printing technologies weren't quite as good, so they couldn't do the photorealistic, poster design. So they had to use more simplified designs, which were actually allowed for some interesting creativity from the graphic designers. So anyways, that's an area I want to keep learning. It's very interesting. Now here's some magazines I picked up. I picked up this vintage Harper's Bazaar. This one's from 1937. And the cool thing is the cover is by Cassandra. He did a lot of kind of iconic poster work in this era as well. And I did sell one of his posters, which I'll show a little later. But I also really love the typography on from this era on Harper's. It's just beautiful. And the back is pretty interesting too. It features Barbara Stanwyck, who is a famous Hollywood movie actress of the period. And she's, pushing the lucky strikes right there. So always cool to see just even the vintage advertising. Then I also won a really interesting magazine lot of early 80s Vogues. Actually, these are all from 82. And I've never really owned any from this particular period. So I only started looking through them recently. But they're great. The magazines I've owned from the 80s that I really like, the American ones, are the American Elle magazines. And I believe the American edition started in the mid 80s, and the quality is really, really amazing. These Vogues are nice, but I think from my understanding, possibly collectors tend to prefer the American Elle's versus American Vogue of this period. So I haven't really studied it up too much. This is a pretty big issue right here. You can see this one. I really like the cover and just with the wow right there. I just think it's funny. It makes me think of like kind of Japanese advertising sometimes, how they just throw in a random wow or something like that. So now getting into the sales, and I'll start with the clothing. I'll try and kind of blast through stuff because there is a lot of stuff to go over that I want to share with you guys. So this first one is a vintage Nepalese patchwork hoodie. And sold on Depop. These first few ones actually are sales from Depop. Sold for $60, and it cost about $8. And for these kind of things, you always want to use kind of boho, hippie. These kind of keywords are kind of good, and I'm still trying to get better at the best keywords to use for certain things. And you always want to be accurate, as accurate as possible. So don't just keyword spam. Next is a vintage Adler leather jacket with Aztec patterning, and that one also sold on Depop, sold for $80, and it cost about $12 to $14. I can't remember exactly. But I thought that was a very cool piece with that, the patterning, right? Kind of going through the chest, around the chest area and back. Next, and this was one of the first jackets I ever picked up, and I thought it was going to be like, $1 million when I first found it. It's called the Original Limited Edition James Dean Leather Bomber Jacket, and this was a size medium. And I think I paid probably like $20. And, the inside was cool because you can see James Dean on the lining and everything. But it sold for $80. And, I think I just, I had it in my store for a very long time. So I think I just, I overpriced it. I didn't really know jackets at all back in that period. I'm still working at getting better at pricing. I'm trying to price more, competitively in general. Next up is, I like this one a lot, and I love picking up jerseys. A Dwayne Wade Miami Heat jersey, and it's just got a really great like Miami Vice sort of colorway. Size 44, which I think corresponds to medium. I'm not 100%. I can never remember. But that's sold on Depop for $47, and that one cost about $8 to $10. I remember it hadn't been priced too badly. This next one is actually one of my favorite pieces that I've sold in recent times. It's a vintage, Silkworms is the brand, Marilyn Monroe, Andy Warhol, art style bomber jacket. And it's sold on Depop from an offer someone sent me of $175. I had it listed for $275 on there. I priced it high because it's such an interesting and unique piece. And it cost about $20. So it was just I just think it's a cool piece. And, probably even could have held out for a bit more, but I felt good at $175. And there was a lot of interest on that piece because, it just looks cool. And it was clearly from the 80s to 90s. It was made in Korea, and it had shoulder pads. It had a couple different details that kind of let you know it was an older piece. Next up is a Ralph Lauren brown pattern sweater, and it was a men's size large, and that one sold on Depop for $50, and it cost about $10. So that was a nice piece. There's a lot of Ralph Lauren out there, and it's a wonderful brand, but I do try and pick up pieces that have some sort of interesting factors or distinguishing factors because that brand is so saturated. I mean, just a basic, one color polo is not really anything. So yeah, you kind of want to look for interesting aesthetic factors plus, the material. Then next up is a vintage Deion Sanders Atlanta Braves jersey. Majestic is the company, size medium. And that one also sold on Depop for $54, and it cost about $17. And Deion was he was an amazing football player. He was a decent baseball player. It's he didn't really hit for average, but he had crazy speed. And I mean, it's still kind of incredible those guys like Bo Jackson and Deion that could play multiple sports, professionally. I mean, that's just. I still think it's so cool. It makes me think of Shohei Ohtani nowadays, who's like pitching and batting, which is kind of like never thought you'd see that. It's just these amazing phenomenons. So going on to the next one. This was also kind of another favorite piece of mine was this Vintage Patchworks was the company, I think, denim jacket featuring a lot of coyotes that had been embroidered and on throughout the jacket. And that one sold on Depop for $37, and it cost about $8. And I just thought it was a really cool piece. I just the coyotes howling at the moon on the back is just fantastic. And plus, I think of the coyotes. I hear them all the time here. After they kill something, they all start yipping and howling like crazy. So, that's always impressive. Next is Tom Waits' Bone Machine album t-shirt, size large, and the hang tag was all style. So, All styles usually, I want to say, and I'm not like the most well versed on this, is like late 2000s and 2010s. So this album, I believe, came out in the 90s, and so there are T-shirts with a different hang tag that came out for that particular time period. So I didn't want to say this was vintage, because then you know, some people might not know, and they just see a hand tag and they might buy it thinking it is actually from that period. So I do want to try and be careful always when I'm like, try and be accurate for people, you know. So this one sold on eBay for 34 and it cost about 3. And next up was another piece I really loved. It's a vintage Bogner ski suit. It's got tons of embroidery and lots of beautiful detail work all throughout it. It was made in the USA, size 8. Now, when I got it, it was very much priced up, and I paid $100 for it. And that was with the original thinking that I might be able to sell this thing for like $500, $600. But then the more I researched it, you know, when I got home and I really was trying to look into it more carefully before I listed it, I'm like, it's probably not worth quite that much unless, you know, you're really willing to wait for the right person. And so I listed it actually fairly high-ish, $399 or best offer. But eventually, just recently, someone shot me an offer for $200, and I took it because, you know, it's kind of winter's going to be like fading out pretty soon, and I don't really feel the desire to store this thing for that long, like for possibly another year. So I figured, hey, move it now, recoup some money, make a little bit. If I'd known I'd be selling it for $200, I would not have gotten it for $100. But I was so excited when I found that piece, and it was so cool. So it's all right, you know, it worked out, and hopefully it'll go to somebody who can really enjoy it and make use of it one way or the other. Next up is South Africa Springboks rugby jersey by Canterbury, and it's size L, and it was new with tags. This one only cost about $8, and you know, I started getting interest right away when I listed it. I think I listed it at $114.99 or best offer, and actually somebody that I saw from they were from Australia. They sent me some offers, and I just took one for $60. Because the reason this jersey is interesting is that it's specifically a jersey that was for the 2010 match versus Australia. And so it has that specificity that makes it interesting, and it's probably not a high run. You know, they probably didn't make a ton of them. So anyways, this person was from Australia, and I'm like, you know, pass them a deal because they're going to have to be, you know, paying very high shipping and all this, and decent chances, you know, they're a pretty big fan, and and plus for the international stuff, you don't risk the returns as well. So you know, I figured that was win-win for both me and the customer. Next up is G4 floral polo shirt, size medium. Floral pattern, and sold for $42. It cost about $5, and I'm actually getting a little more into those kind of golf sport polos. You know, as I know I'm getting a little better at knowing what to look for, even though they're not necessarily my favorite thing. I understand why people like them. Next is a Supreme Static Stripes t-shirt, size XL, and sold that one for $40. It cost about $10. Sold very quickly. Definitely one I could have held out for, you know, and sold a little bit higher, but I figured, you know, that's good. Move it quick. I did think it was a cool shirt. That was probably my favorite Supreme piece I found when I found like 3 or 4 at the same time, and there were others that I didn't pick up. Now going on to the next one, this was actually probably definitely one of my best clothing sales I've ever had, is a Capital, I believe that's a company name with a K, 10 Jiku baseball jersey, size XL. So my understanding is this is a Japanese streetwear kind of company, And this one had really cool like embroidering with, you know, the skeleton hand on the front, and then on the back, you know, you got the skeleton as well of the back and rib cage and everything. But that one sold for $340, and it cost about 10. And that was on eBay. And this one definitely had a lot of interest. So this is kind of one of those brands that probably has a pretty strong following and is fairly hard to acquire here in the U.S. So so that was a good one. Next up were a pair of Ferragamo Gancini moccasin loafers, size 10.5. These sold for $142, and they cost about $8. Ferragamo is sometimes one of those brands that you know, the thrift stores don't always clock, so definitely can keep an eye out for those. You know, I'm not a shoe expert, but as I've stated many times, shoes are definitely one of my greatest weaknesses, but they're fun. They just are kind of space hogs though, so I've definitely tried to be a little more careful in what I pick up. But anyways, that was a good shoe win for once. Next, another piece I really liked was the Santa Fe Sunbuster hoodie, size L. I just love the colors on there, and you know, with the blue off of the kind of orange patterning and everything. So that one cost about 75, sold for 75, and it cost about 20. So I did pay up when I got that one. Next up is Rolling Stones Quebec concert hoodie from 2015, size large. It cost about 6, sold for 50, and this one I definitely could have sold for more. It sold very quickly, but there was a guy from Canada who had messaged me on if I'd be willing to take a, you know, 50, which was a bit lower than probably the market rate and everything, because the shipping was so brutal. Which I still don't understand why shipping to Canada is so excessively from the U.S. is so costly. It's really weird. You'd figure they'd have better deals between the two countries. So anyways, I took the deal, and hopefully they can enjoy the hoodie. Next up is LeBron Lakers Black MVP jersey, size 48. This one sold for 98, and it cost about 20. And I always love finding jerseys, especially of guys like LeBron, which is fairly rarish to find decent ones, or even just finding any, really. So that was a nice sale. I personally, for the Lakers LeBron jerseys, I'd want kind of the retro, like blue ones, you know, from, they do those sometimes from their like Minneapolis days, I want to say, when they were the Minneapolis Lakers. And I just think those look nice, you know. Getting a Kobe one too would be nice as well. Next up is Dale of Norway sweater, and I forget exactly what the flaw issues were. I always try and say, like, you know, when a item has distinct flaws, I try and put flaws in the title, you know, with a little like star, so that people can see that and they'll know to read the description. Because while people do tend to shop with their eyes, they're not really keyed in, maybe looking at you know, for flaws. They're looking maybe at the first picture, and then they assume everything is good. So if you're not very, you know, blasting it out there in the title and making sure it's like one of the first pictures up, you know, people can miss it, and then they're upset when they get the item. So anyways, that's kind of just to say, I try and be as you know, loud about the flaws as I can. So this one sold for 98, and it cost about 10. And my only critique for myself on this one is I could have definitely used better keywords, like just basically it's a very chunky, like Nordic sweater. So you can use words like Nordic. I had Norway, but Nordic I think is one that people look for. Chunky, fisherman. So those were a few that could have been thrown in there. Next up, this is a vintage San Diego State baseball jersey, size large, and you know, I got it very cheaply for like $4, something like that. I think even less. And I think the reason they had priced it so low is I think they just assumed it was like a high school baseball jersey or something. But this one had very good patches, and SDSU is, you know, they got decent programs for sports. So it sold for 70. on eBay. Definitely another one I could have just taken a higher, waited for a higher price eventually, but it sold fast, and 70 was good, I figured. Next is another Rolling Stones piece. This was a Raglan t-shirt from 2016 in the desert. So I think it was probably Phoenix or something. And it was size large. Sold for 40. Cost about 5. So that was a good one. I try and keep an eye out for. I like a lot of the concert stuff. Rolling Stones. It's so saturated, but if you can find things that are actually tied to specific concerts and events, people collect these things, or they've been to those concerts and they're looking for stuff to remind them of it, and stuff like that. Next up, this is another one of my favorites and one of my favorite finds, was a vintage varsity Letterman jacket for the Winlock Cardinals, and it just had an incredible wrestling patch on the back, and then all the sports stuff on the front. It had a lot of really cool details, and this person must have been some a superhuman athlete. That's just my vibe just looking at that jacket. It's got so much swag. But yeah, I think maybe it was from the 80s would be my guess, but I don't really know for sure. But that one sold for 105, and it cost about 18. But man, that's a cool piece in my opinion. I think that would be a fun category to collect personally, are the vintage high school and college cardigans and Letterman jackets and all that. Because they carry so much history, basically, is one aspect, and cool aesthetics. So next is another concert shirt. This one, Alan Parsons Secret Tour t-shirt, size XL. Sold for 47, cost about 3. Not too much to say. Even some of these, it's a contemporary concert shirt. Some of these contemporary concert shirts can be good. So, I would generally check if you have the time and inclination for them. So next is Ralph Lauren navy canvas hooded raincoat, size XXL, sold for 60, cost about 20. Just kind of one of those solid pieces that are fairly easily movable. They're good. Ralph Lauren's good, and it had good qualities basically. Next is vintage Phoenix Suns starter jacket, size large. Really cool piece. I find a decent amount of Sun stuff obviously here in the Valley. So this one sold for 129, but I did pay up $35 to $40. I remember where I found that. It was right off the rack at the Power and McDowell store, which is by I think an Airbase or something, but that store, I don't know why, but it has so much good clothing. It's definitely for Phoenix people, it's a good one. Next is a vintage Eddie Bauer Southwestern Aztec fleece, made in USA, size medium, sold for $99, cost $8. Sold fairly fast, so that was good, Next, another concert shirt, Travis the Invisible Band, size large. This one's from 2001. A good amount of interest on this one, and it sold for $67. It cost about $3. And the reason this one sticks out in my mind is because I picked it up from the Oak in Scottsdale store. And that one, I don't know why, but all the concert shirts they get, they usually price them at $12. Even things that are, they're worth $3. Literally, you can't resell it for more than $3. And they price it to 12. So there must be some decree from whoever's running that store, or maybe the pricers are just fixated on doing that for the concert tee. So anyways, I was happy because I picked that one up. Usually I don't even look at shirts in that store, but I got that one for $3 at that store. So I was got him. Next is Taylor Swift Eras Tour t-shirt, size medium. This one sold for $30. It cost about $5. I thought, I have no feelings about Taylor Swift either way. I don't really know her music. I don't know much about her except with Travis Kelce, and I got things I could say about him, but I'm not going to say them. But the graphic on this one is good. That black white, just large image, looks cool. Definitely one I would have, considered wearing, even as a caring about Taylor Swift person. So next is Hammett leather Santana crossbody leather bag kind of purse. That one sold for $99, cost about $8, and I think they didn't price this one up just because it's not a brand they really knew. It's not a brand I know. I just looked it up when I found it because I thought the material was good and it had good weight to it as well. That's why I even checked it out. So otherwise, I didn't know anything about that stuff. So, but you know, I do bags and purses. Time to time, you know, I'm that's like shoes. I don't know it that well, but I will always look, especially on the fresh rolls. Next is a Sundance weathered leather overcoat, size medium. I believe men's medium is what it was. Sold for $145, and I believe it cost about $18. So that one was okay. You know, it took a very long time to sell. And I think my problem on this one was I think I probably mispriced it, like I overpriced it. So next time, if I was finding this piece again, I would be much more competitive in how I'd price it. And the last clothing piece is a poncho red button up, the flea flicker, I believe it is the name of that style, shirt that sold for $45. And it cost about $6. I mean, poncho for me so far, I find it sells very quickly now. It has a lot of cool design touches and details. The material, I don't know. I just don't think it's that great personally, but you know, it sells very quickly and at decent margins. So definitely one to look out for. I find it every once in a while here. Now going on to books. This first one was a sale on Pangobooks, which, you know, I really like that site because it's really, they only do books, and it's a very, I don't know, the customers for me have almost always been great, and I like buying books on there as well for myself. Diez Años con Mafalda is a comic book by, I can't even remember the guy's name right now, is Quinto, I believe, or Quito. But the drawings are really cool. That one sold for $34, and it costs about $2. Next is a VHS from 1995, Selena por siempre, and that one I believe is her last concert. And this VHS is pretty hard to find. And even though the box was a bit beat up, it sold for $104, and it cost less than $1. So that was definitely a great one. I don't do much VHS, so that's definitely the best I've ever done with any VHS I've handled. Next is a hardcover edition of Stephen King's It. Now this one didn't have a price on the dust jacket, and there wasn't like anything on the copyright page saying first edition, so I didn't list first edition or any of that stuff. But it sold for $45 almost immediately, and it cost about $3. Next is, and it was in very good condition though, so that was really those like vintage Stephen King books, they really get read, and you know the books just get broken down because they're so big, you know. So next is Folk Art of the Andes, which I thought was just a beautiful book. It sold for $29, and it cost about $2.50. Next is an interesting vintage paperback from 1971 called Motivation in Advertising. It sold for $55, and it cost about $1. And these kind of ones, I love vintage paperbacks, and so this one just jumped out at me because it had very nice cover art. So, and it must have some key aspects for why the price it sells for what it sells for. I didn't really do deep research on that. I just saw that it was, easy to sell, basically, for good money. Next is a lot of 2 books on Kazakhstani jewelry and art culture. And I found these together. They cost about $5. And they sold for $68, and obviously it must have been from somebody who had a passion or interest in that particular thing, and they are very cool books and very topic specifics and fairly hard to find. So definitely cool to collect or have in one's collection if you have interest in jewelry. Well, it has a couple intersections on reasons why somebody would want that book. Somebody who's interested in Kazakhstani culture, people who might be interested in fashion, jewelry, like kind of art history, and design. So there's a lot of different aspects that could draw in different people, which is always good with collectibles or books or anything really. Next is Le Mans official hardcover dust jacket book from 2009. That's the like 24-hour race that's, has a lot of history behind it. That one sold for $62, cost about $250. Next is another art kind of jewelry book, Bulgari Serpenti collection, which is a beautiful book with slipcase. This one sold for $67 and it cost about $4. And next, this was a book I had part of that huge collection I was given by one of my parents' friends whose wife had passed away, and this was part of her collection. She had a lot of like vintage French philosophy books, and also kind of occult and astrology books. So it was kind of interesting mix. But this was Blavatsky, La Voix du Silence from 1977, so The Voice of Silence, and sold for $33. So I've been gradually kind of working through selling that material, but it takes time because it's pretty niche, And next up, these are good. This one I want to show just because these are good ones to look out for that a lot of the book scanners will usually miss in the thrift stores, is a Pure Bentley catalog book from 2020. It sold for $67 and it cost about $2. And the reason I point it out is these luxury car catalog brochure books for Ferrari, for Porsche, for Bentley, for Aston Martin. And they're not all worth money, but a good amount of them are, because people will pay for these. People love cars, and they usually don't have ISBNs. So just keep an eye out for them. They're fairly easy money, in my opinion. Next is another Taylor Swift piece. This is a 2011 tour book. Sold for $30, cost about $4. And, I found, I want to say 4 or 5 at once, so from somebody's collection, and they're pretty cool, these are fun things to collect. And, just Swift has such an insane amount of fans. It's wild. Next is The Black Woman, an anthology from 1970, 7th printing. So this one sold for $25. It cost about $2. Sometimes for the vintage paperbacks, if you can find some value in some of these very specific topics, like featuring like minorities and like things with feminism, LGBTQ. These things can have pretty interesting collector bases, because a lot of times they didn't have huge print runs on these. This was just when things were starting to shift in the culture, where there's more representation of like African American writers and stuff like that. So people are interested in these for varying reasons like that. So but pretty cool books in my opinion. This is going along with that. This next book is The Tattooists from 1977, hardcover with dust jacket, first edition. So tattoo culture, another thing that used to be kind of fairly marginalized from the mainstream, at least. And this was a nicely produced book. It cost about $250, sold for $75. So yeah, these kind of topics are cool, in my opinion, and good ones to look for. This next one is The Eye of Shamba, The Art of Eugene Grisby from 2001, and I didn't note it down, but I do think it's from SMOCA, a SMOCA exhibit, which is the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, and it sold for $70, cost about $2. I had an ask that was fairly high-ish. I think it was $139.99, and eventually I got an offer here, and I just took it. Next up, this one I thought when I first found it and when I first showed it in a show and tell video a little while back, I was like, oh, I thought this might be quite valuable. It was a Watership Down by Richard Adams, the first U.S. edition from 1972, first printing. Now, it has some condition wear, but like, what would your guess be that this might sell for? Because for me, when I first found it, I'm like, oh, this might be $200 plus. But that was before, I didn't know anything about what the supply on that book is. That's just a kind of a wild guess. But it sold for $67 and it cost about $250. So that was still great, no complaints. But I believe, the one you really want to find for Watership Down would be the first UK edition. And I didn't really research, but I believe those are more valuable. So still, very nice find, and can't complain. But it's always fun when you find something. For me, I always like guessing, when do I think it's from, just based on the aesthetics of the book and the typography. And then I also like guessing, well, what do I think it might be worth? And for certain things, obviously, I'm better than others. And I can still make mistakes too. Wild guesses that are show off, even in areas that I have the most knowledge in. So, it's always humbling, which is kind of also fun. This next one was a really cool one, and it's going along with what I was saying about the tattoo and kind of vintage like stuff with minorities, LGBTQ, and all this. This is the Mercenaries Manual. The book was from the 1970s. It was printed in Canada, and it's by Terry Edwards. And it's such a specialty thing. This is like special forces and everything, and a very rare book. It sold for $153. It cost $2, and that's another book that is very easy to miss. So oftentimes you want to think. For me, I like to think, oh, who would want this and why? Why would it interest them? It's rare. Probably somebody who's into special forces and military collecting, or they have they've served, or they have experience with it. That's somebody who it could interest, and had a kind of a cool cover too. It's kind of subtle, but it's just that dude down in the corner with just the nice background color and everything. So next up, anyways, is Vintage UK Vogue from October 1953, and the cover's by Horst, who was a really cool photographer, in my opinion, one of my favorites for fashion. It sold for $65. I honestly can't remember what I paid. It might have been around $20 because I got a bunch of UK Vogues, vintage ones, all at once some years back. But I do love the vintage fashion magazines, and a lot of them were kind of that I had gotten were for my personal collection. So I wasn't always meticulously keeping track of what they were costing me, keeping track of it exactly. So, and this next one sold pretty much in a day. It's a Tintin box set, soft covers. It's the full set of Tintins, and it cost $8, and it sold for $50. Another one, could have waited and gotten more money on it, but I made money, and hopefully the person getting it is getting decent value. Next, going into art and objects. We have the vintage mid-century modern ceramic giraffe figure. This one, it was pretty big. It was 22 inches tall. Cost about $18, and it sold for $135. And it was very sad because here I'll show you a picture of my dog Jasper saying a very sad goodbye to his only giraffe friend. So, because I had to build the box and everything, so that's why you see that box in half-formed condition. Next is Jack Bush is the artist. Striped column, vintage frame print. And this one cost about $10, and it sold for $120 on Facebook Marketplace. And a lot of the art and objects, a decent amount have been from Marketplace, and Offerup. I'm starting to get a little more traction. I guess, you get ratings and you can show that you're a credible person and you're not, some wacko. Next is James Dean poster, framed. It's by Phil Stern, and it's from 1990. Sold for $45 on Offerup, and it cost about $5. Next is a Native American The Warrior oil painting framed by Joe Shallop. Very nicely done. And for some reason at the Goodwill where I found it, they priced it so cheaply. It cost $6.50 and it sold for $150 on a marketplace. This next one ties into that first magazine I showed, the Harper's Bazaar from 1937. This is a L'Atlantique ocean liner lithograph from 1996 by none other than the same artist of the Harper's Bazaar cover, Cassandra. So he's doing a lot of poster work and also magazine work, illustration. And I love this image personally. It sold for $300 and it cost about $10, but definitely a beautiful piece. And I mean, I'd love to collect the originals, but you know, you're probably talking, I'm guessing, I don't know, 10, 20, 30K, if not more. I haven't done the research on that, but they're cool pieces and you probably got to pay. Next is a Disney Villain Snow Globe. This is a really cool piece, and it had a sound, you know, where you hear Maleficent, you know, laughing with dementedly. It's actually really cool. And that one sold on Facebook Marketplace. It cost me about $12, sold for $100. And this one went to a guy who actually has like a Disney like toy store down in Mesa. So I'm like, oh, I'm gonna check that out because I didn't know about it. So and I love those places. It's kind of like being in heaven. And my friend Gloomy Girl Books would make fun of me for being a Disney adult. Indulging in that sort of stuff. There's nothing, well, she hates some stuff, but she really hates Disney adults. So I try and wear my Donald Duck like hat and shirts and stuff when we hang out, just to, because I'm not always the nicest person. I'm a bit sneaky. Next is a really cool large Toulouse-Lautrec poster. This one sold on Marketplace for $80 and it cost about $8, so that was cool. Toulouse-Lautrec. Love Toulouse-Lautrec. Next, this was a cool piece. This is a vintage Norwegian Sun Cruise like figurine, about 10 inches long. And, you know, it was very cheap. It was like $3. And when I first saw it, I'm like, you know what? I really think like there's got to be collectors for these kind of things. That's how I was thinking about it, because I never found one of those things. And yeah, sure enough, sold for $46, fairly quick. It wasn't even in mint condition, you know. It had a bit of a wear on some of the writing on there. But those are just like fun display pieces because, you know, there's a lot of boating culture and people who are boating enthusiasts. You know, I'm like, why wouldn't you want that if you're into that stuff? It would work great. Next is a John Bott's spring window where there's like a little orange cat in the chair. And that one was 35 by 31, so fairly large piece. Cost about $14, sold for $125. That one was on eBay. And it was kind of annoying because I had to build the box on that one. But I'm getting better at that stuff, so it's not as big of a deal. And I used the term Matisse style on that in the title because I do think it had a Matisse feel, and I feel that was, you know, fair use of Matisse's name. I try and be careful with that stuff though, because I don't want to deceive people too much or draw in people who wouldn't have no interest in this artist, and when they're just strictly looking for Matisse. So you do have to use your judgment on that and be judicious with it. Next is a vintage poster. The Innocent Eye Test by Mark Tansey. This one's from 1989, and it's from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Cost about $5, and it sold for $78. And it's always interesting to see. Sometimes I like looking like who's buying the thing. And this one was somebody whose name was like Agris, you know, something with agriculture. So it's clearly somebody who's interested in farming, or you know, stuff like that. So it's just interesting. And it makes sense because, you know, there were cows featured on there and it's fun. This next one is also a really cool one in my opinion. Classic Northwest Coast red sun carved wooden mask. And it was $2 and it sold for $150. There was a ton of interest on this one. And that was just a great sale and return. And I remember when I first found it, I wasn't sure and I just looked it up because it looked interesting, especially for things that are like Native American and they look like they're probably handmade, you know. That's always things I try and keep an eye out for. This next one, I probably wouldn't do it again, but it's still fun. Vintage wooden loon bookends. I picked these up from White Dove, and I think I paid like 20. And they are very cool. But, you know, they sold for 65, and were they worth the hassle? Nah, not necessarily, but, you know, that's okay. I kind of like the duck and bird things. Just like this next one is vintage wooden duck decoy. It's a pintail. Somebody reached out to me, and they kind of they let me know it was a pintail, and that it was likely from the 40s by Padco, Padco. So that was actually somebody on Marketplace, I think, who kind of dropped a little knowledge on me. And this was very cheap. It cost about $4 and sold for 65. So I would say the duck decoys, the bird decoys, and figurines, hand painted, you know, especially if they're signed on the bottom. Keep an eye out for those because they're usually not priced up, and there's people looking for those. This last one is the best one, and it's a realistic like landscape painting of Hawaii. And the thing that stuck out to me when I first saw it is the quality of the painting was very nice. Like, it was very tight, beautifully detailed, and so it's called Tropical Moods by a Hawaiian artist named Roy Gonzalez Tabora. And it was framed about 15 by 17, and it was not marked expensive at all. It was like $5, and it sold for $1,500. I had a much higher ask price, and my guess is if I'd been more patient, probably could have gotten more. But you know, happy to move it, make a great return, and then hopefully somebody's getting a piece that they can enjoy. And you know, if ever they want to resell it, hopefully there's still enough meat on the bone for them to make money as well. So anyways, yeah, that was definitely good. I could probably now I can justify buying some more stupid stuff for myself, like the I'll see if I can find some super wacky vintage Polish circus posters, because that's on my list of things I want to try and track down for my own collecting purposes. So yeah, let me know if you had any favorites, any comments, corrections, and all that. I know there was a lot there that I shared, so through a range of stuff. But yeah, I had a bunch that I liked. I tried to point out the ones that I thought were, you know, the coolest or my favorites. And, you know, I always have to fight the temptation on a lot of stuff that I want to end up keeping or whatever. But you can't keep everything, as I always remind myself. So yeah, hope you guys have a good one. And yeah, always remember, always keep having fun. Take care. Bye.